I want to talk about Dark Side of the Ring, which we discussed a few episodes ago about
Mhm.
its season 2 lineup, and they released parts 1 and 2 of the Chris Benoit story that they did. Um, Again, for all my protestations about the why behind Dark Side of the Ring, the very title of the show irks me because it's not like wrestling is presented in a good light very often by the mainstream media.
Mhm.
They do it, like I said before, they're very well researched. They do a good job. This was no exception. They did an excellent job getting pretty much all the pertinent parties involved here, with the exception of Kevin Sullivan, who they tried to get on and he declined. I thought they did a very good job. What did you think?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was very powerful, very emotional, and it I was very much like sad by the end of it. Like just definitely like wow. It it was like you said, very emotional roller coaster. And I'm really glad that they did two parts to this, because it sounds like there was, as we saw, a lot of ground to cover to kind of explain Chris Benoit's time in wrestling and his personal life. I mean, it wasn't perfect. I mean, there's some little things I can nitpick, and we can kind of talk into that as we go. But just overall, I really enjoyed just hearing from other people their side of the story, or their perspective or observations from that time period. And for me, I know just like the very much the surface level of what happened. We lived through that. You and I and all the other wrestling fans who are old enough to remember it, we lived through it. But I don't know all the details, or knew of all details from that time. So it's just really interesting to hear from the people what went on, what was going on. And there were some things I think they glossed over as well, but just overall the kind of describe just that whole situation. I really did enjoy what they did here, and the directors and the producers of this show. I really enjoy just the presentation of it. And I think for anyone watching, I just hope at the end of the day, people that watch this can take away, hopefully history doesn't repeat itself, and people that watch this can learn something from this and realize you got to take better care of your bodies out there. If you're a wrestler, uh, don't do steroids. If you have an issue, talk to someone. I mean, there's a lot to uncover here. I just hope people watch this can learn from this and not
Well,
have a tragedy.
I hope people take from it is that this was not a situation that happened because of wrestling,
Yes,
and
yeah,
like that's a big thing. Like it's ridiculous to try and blame the business on this, and I guess this is what makes me so angry at Chris Benoit.
hmm
And at the whole tragedy, I reflect on a car ride that you and I took with you and your brother, and we were talking about his son's interview that he had done and wanting to like sort of like carry on his dad's legacy, and I was hot about it because it was like,
yeah,
no, like your dad's legacy,
yeah,
your dad, and I this is what made me so glad of that what they included Jericho's quote about. It's like, dude, he almost killed wrestling,
exactly.
and the human tragedy is unspeakable. What he did was monstrous, and in a weird way, I wish they had spent more time on that because I think diehard wrestling fans, a lot of them have this sort of romanticized view about Benoit because he was so damn good.
hmm
But what he did at the end of his life, madman or not, was monstrous. And I
Yeah,
feel like they're almost desensitized to that because of the other side, because they don't want to believe that he was capable of doing these awful things. Um,
yeah.
so I was
Well,
glad that they included Jericho saying, that he almost killed wrestling and that his legacy, if you were to tell him that his legacy would be erased, that would break his heart. It was um, almost a
well,
poetic punishment in that sense. Not that any punishment is just for murdering your child's son and your wife over a couple day period and then yourself, but there was sort of something there I'm glad that they included that. I wish honestly they had spent a little bit more time on the tragedy itself. I thought that for
yeah.
all the time they took, they rushed through that.
hmm
And that to me I thought did a disservice. Again, hammer it home. Like, we're doing this story, like, let people know. Like, they said it almost like casually that, like, he had broken Nancy's back while he was, and then strangled her. Like, that is horrific.
hmm Well, I was just going to add, it was, yeah, what Jericho said, that it would, if Benoit knew that what he did almost killed the wrestling business, and that his peers, that was the biggest thing, that if he was to realize or know that what he did will lose the respect of his peers, that would hurt him as well. So that was another big takeaway, what Jericho said at the very end. It was interesting. Yeah, you're right. But the story that they were trying to tell here, they made it sound like after Eddie died, Benoit went down the spiral of depression, and ultimately that's what kind of led to him killing his wife and his kid. And I was a little confused because I would think that there was more to that, because they kind of said like Chris and her were having some domestic issues, but they didn't really go into detail about that too much. And so I feel like there was more to that. It wasn't just Eddie's death that caused it all.
Well, of course, yeah.
But you get what I'm saying. But it's like they said, oh yeah, after Eddie died, that's when Chris changed and became this whole new person or different person, and started spiraling down in the next 2-year period between when Eddie died and when Chris died.
Yeah, I mean, people have talked about that for a long time, and I think that's 100% accurate. That Eddie Guerrero was a rock of steadiness for Chris Benoit. But, like you said, it's not just that. There is more to the story there. And the domestic issues, a lot of times in the wake of this whole thing, Chris Benoit was painted as this ultimate family man, this loving husband and father. And I still believe those things to be true. It's adult conversations, but even somebody, that's can slip up sometimes, especially somebody that's dealing with, the whole roid rage thing was a misnomer and misreported by the mainstream media. But continued abuse of steroids and continued abuse of your body, it does wreak havoc on you mentally, to where you could be capable of doing things that you would then later regret. Certainly, no one would think to the magnitude of what he did. And the whole CTE conversation, I wish would have been longer. Again, I almost wish I just wish that they had spent more time towards the end of the story. They do manage to give you a somewhat happy ending with the reunion of Nancy's sister and was it David Benoit?
Yeah, David Benoit.
So that's nice, and it was a cool moment because Chavo is a producer for Dark Side of the Ring. Him helping David through it when he gets emotional. One thing I didn't know, that Eddie was still sort of with it when Chavo found him in the hotel room and he died in his arms. I didn't know that. That to me, as a Eddie Guerrero superfan, broke me in two. That was one of the most powerful, saddest parts of the whole thing to me.
Absolutely, no, it was very sad. And just now, next time if we ever get to see Chavo again, because he did wrestle here last year, I would definitely like to tell him thank you for just opening up and telling that side of the story. And I thought that was very powerful. And just I want to give my condolences all these years later about that. But just the first episode, I enjoyed that it very much was the story of Eddie Guerrero as well, and like his relationship with Chris Benoit. I really just enjoyed seeing that side of things. And then the second half was more just the destruction of Chris Benoit that led to these events. But yeah, like I said, I want to know more about like the domestic issues and just kind of what was going on. Like I said, they really touch on, because even William Regal at the funeral, he just focused on the tribute. He just focused on him as a wrestler, but apparently he lived in the same area, so he knew stuff was going on at home, but they didn't really dig into that too much. So what I'm getting at is I kind of wanted to learn what was more going on the home front that maybe kind of led to this incident.
Another MVP of the episode was Jim Ross. His perspective on both, like, his almost defiance, like, look, we did a tribute show. We didn't know the whole story, but we didn't know that we didn't know the whole story, because a lot of people were very critical of WWE and pro wrestling at that time for, I guess one of the things that's burned forever into my memory, I was watching that show. They got the timeline a little wrong, if memory serves, because as I was watching that Raw tribute show, it was during the show that more details started to come out on the internet. And I remember watching it with my dad and him getting kind of pissed and saying, I'm not going to watch this show that's honoring a murderer like this. Like, this is crazy. And it's like, well, we didn't know. Like, and that was something that was pretty wild, reflecting back on it. And just so I was glad to have Jim Ross's input there about the tribute show, about hell no, he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. I think it is one of the most ridiculous arguments from the pro wrestling community that somehow is like, oh, should Chris Benoit be in the Hall of Fame? No, like it's like that's what I mean about the desensitization about what he actually did, in right mind or not. You can't do it.
Well, I was just gonna say Jim Ross brought up good points, and even if we did induct him, the only thing people will focus on is just the last 24 hours of his life.
Yes,
and that's it's true. No matter what he did, he could have won the belt 20 times, a million times, but unfortunately, all he's ever going to be remembered is the last 24 hours. Actually, the last couple of days of his life. That was a little detail I didn't know, that they were both, his wife and kid were both dead in the house for a while, and he was still doing stuff in the house. Just how psychotic that whole thing was. That was very sickening to hear. But I'm with you. Yeah, he can't go in the Hall of Fame because that's all people are going to focus on is what he did at the end of his life. And that's unfortunate, but hey, that's what it is. That's what it is. And then I was just also going to say, yeah, with Jim Ross, I totally agree with him. It's like, it's a damn if you do, damn if you don't situation, because he didn't show up Saturday at that house show. He didn't show up to the pay-per-view. And that's when they, did the wellness call and found out he was dead. So, and they didn't know all the info. Yeah, the police are going to keep all that. They're not going to just tell some company, oh yeah, it's actually a murder-suicide. They just, all that the WWE knew at the time was he was dead. And so, of course, they're just going to do what they think is the best to handle this. We got to do a tribute show to honor him. They didn't know all the details yet. So, like I said, it's damn if you do, damn if you don't situation. So I'm glad JR spoke up about that. And then I'm glad they showed the video of Vince McMahon. What was it, the following week on Raw, when he says we'll never talk about him again. This is the last time you're going to hear his name from my mouth on WWE television. So,
and rightfully so. And like, and if you walk away from anything, like the interesting thing for me was that the tale between two episodes and how these people that knew him very well and were friends with him. And knew him intimately well and loved him, have had to compartmentalize him into different parts of his life. You hear Vicky Guerrero talking lovingly about, him and Nancy's wedding day, and that's what she likes to remember, and she's very glowing. But by the end, she's like, how could he do this? And she's angry and sad. And it was very interesting sort of study of how they've had to deal with that and look at him as almost two separate people living within one person. And how they've had to come to terms with that, which I cannot imagine how difficult that is. But that is, unfortunately, I think, sort of the way that it has to be. And I certainly take nothing away from all the entertainment that he brought me over the years and everything like that. But, beyond that, he doesn't get any honorifics. There's no plaque waiting for him because of what he did, and that's nobody's fault but his.
What about his wife?
And yeah, I thought that was nice sentiment, especially from Chris Jericho, about wanting to induct Nancy. I don't know if it'll happen, but I'm certainly all for it after Miss Elizabeth.
Yeah.
That's for sure.